All right, time to go over this week's top health headlines with Dr. Gorfinkel. And Dr. Gorfinkel, we're going to begin with a tragic headline. And this is about a child in Brantford, Ontario, who died after contracting rabies.
9 out of 10 cases come from bats in Canada. You know, so dogs have a bad rep, but it's actually bats, where up to 10%, and in fact in BC it's 13% of bats that are infected with rabies. And my heart goes out to those parents. They come into the room. This is all we know. The parents came into the room to discover a bat in the room with the child. And they looked at the child and they said, are there bites? Are there scratches? Is there saliva? They didn't see anything. And unfortunately, the child was not vaccinated immediately, and as a result, the child died from rabies.
Mm-hmm.
It's
and this
heartbreaking.
is really rare. It certainly is, and also really rare. It's the first domestic case of diabetes in the province of Ontario, rabies,
Yeah.
since 1967.
Yeah. Bats don't give us diabetes, they give us rabies, potentially, but it is the first case in 50 years in Ontario. And if you look back at the last century, there's only been, 25, 27 cases? There have been very few cases. But the problem is it's really hard to diagnose because it starts out with mild symptoms that rapidly spin into encephalitis. Mm-hmm. Rabies is 100% fatal.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, as you mentioned, our heart does go out to the family. Just a tragic, tragic story. All right, the federal government's decision not to provide the Novavax COVID vaccine is raising some health equity concerns. Doctor, what more can you tell us about this and why the government has decided not to provide it?
Well, the government looks back at last year and says, look, we purchased 125,000 doses, and of those 125,000 doses, 5,000 doses were used, about 5,500. And they said, that's a monumental waste. We're not going to do it. But for people, especially with immune suppression, the vaccine, the mRNA vaccines, potentially cause or worsen pre-existing immune suppression. So it might raise the risk slightly of rheumatoid arthritis, of psoriasis, and that's exactly why they're landing on that. The immune suppressed especially really want to see Novavax brought in. But the government says, wait a second, we can't afford to lose that kind of money. And unfortunately, the makers of Novavax require a minimum purchase that the Public Health Agency of Canada has said they're not willing to put out for.
Okay. Still on the topic, we also saw another number the other day saying that only about 4% of us are actually fully vaccinated for COVID right now.
Yeah. And you know why? It's kind of like a three-car collision. We've got a virus that's rapidly changing. We've got vaccines that are hard to keep up with those changes and also are not particularly long-lasting. Fortunately, they do give excellent protection against hospitalization and severe disease and death. And then the third thing is that people are doing this. I've had it. And that's a problem. So if you look at the XBB vaccine, the over 70s, well over half of them got it. If you're over 70 in Canada, you've probably had your XBB vaccine. But if you're under that age, the numbers rapidly fall off. And that's a serious problem. People need to understand the virus is changing and we need to use that new vaccine. Of course, once we finally get it into pharmacies, we need to get it into arms.
Right. All right. Finally, how many drinks did you have last week? Well, actually, that's the question of a new StatsCan survey. I'm not asking you, Doctor. But StatsCan asked, and apparently a majority of Canadians said none. What are these numbers? What are these new numbers telling us?
It's absolutely fascinating. So if you're of the XX variety, women, we're more likely to not have had a drink in the past week. So it's about 60% of women, but it's only about 50% of men who said they have not had a drink. So the good news is the messaging is getting through. 2 drinks max a week, and above that, we see higher rates of cancer. And since those guidelines changed in January of 2023, we see these numbers reflected now. And it's really nice because it is a carcinogen. It's one of the world's leading carcinogens. And so alcohol sales have dropped. But you know what's gone up? Cannabis. Cannabis sales went up by 16%.
Right, so a lot of people are replacing alcohol with cannabis.
Yeah. Pick your poison.
Okay, we're going to leave it there on this Friday. Dr. Gorfinkel, thank you.
Thanks so much.